Hello everyone and welcome to this next session of PragatiE Vichaar Break the Bias. I'm extremely delighted to have with us Ms. Nitasha Devasar. She's the Managing Director of Tailor and Francis India and South Asia, Vice President and Commercial Lead for India, South Asia and Africa. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
She is also a two-term president of the Association of Publishers in India, the trade body for international publishers in India, and is the immediate past president. Prior to joining Tailor and Francis, she was academic publishing director at Oxford University Press India for 12 years. A writer and commentator on Indian publishing, her edited book, Publisher on Publishing, Inside India's Book Business, gives a panoramic insider's view. She sits on the international editorial board of Logos, Journal of the World Publishing Community, published by Brill. Ms. Nitasha is an advisor to the Women Leadership Forum of Asia and mentors aspiring leaders on the Tailor and Francis Group Women Leadership Program. She was lauded as Channel News Asia's Women of Substance in Asia 2017. Her leadership focus is on business and personal transformation, and she is currently working on a book on her leadership journey. So thank you very much, Ms. Nitasha, for being a part of this PragatiE Vichaar Break the Bias event on International Women's Day.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So let me directly jump into my questions. So Ms. Natasha Devasar, you have donned multiple hats in your publishing career and have been a keen observer of the industry as well. What changes do you think are needed to move the publishing industry to a growth trajectory?
Excellent question, especially since this is the 75th year of Indian publishing, and it's almost a $10 billion industry according to Nielsen estimates. There are a few things which I consider important. There was an article I wrote last year, I think, on why Indian publishing is not getting its due. And I think one of the things is that we need to, as publishers of all hues, come together. So whether it's international or local publishers, Indian language publishers, or English publishers, or trade publishers, school publishers, we need to come together because we really add value, and it's a resilient industry. We're an important part of the educational and cultural ethos of India. And if we come together, then we can influence policy, we can work with the government. But somehow we have not been able. We do all these things, but we do them in our sort of pockets and silos. But I think if we come together, we are going to have a lot of strength. So I think that's a really important thing we need to do. The other thing I think the last 2 years have taught us is that we need to harness technology much more, make it our friend. And really, again, if we come together, so there are certain publishers who may be a little ahead on that journey, others who need more support, we could actually work together to support that. Using technology to further our business, to add value to our customers is a really important thing. We need to just accept it and do it. The third thing I would say is, and that's about value to customers, which is now, more and more what they want. However you define those customers, they may be institutions, they may be individual students, they may be general readers. Value is linked to quality. And I think we need to pay more attention than we do to the quality of our content. We need to work to ensure, because that's what is going to give us staying power. If you want to sustain, we need to worry about quality. And very close to quality is copyright. During the years I was working as part of the API executive committee, we did a lot of work to create awareness among, among institutions, librarians, students about why copyright is important. And I think that must continue and sustain. We need to, first of all, among ourselves, understand the value and importance of protecting copyright and also creating awareness around it. I think the Indian industry has a lot of goodwill around the world. And we should use that. We should, link up. We can get help, we can get support, we can get materials, and we should really be using that to sort of get ourselves, help in all these areas. And I think that will really make a difference.
Sure. I guess copyright continues to be a challenge in India, even though we are making good strides in that. Okay, so you've worked for almost a decade as the managing director at Tailor and Francis. How has your journey with Tailor and Francis changed you as a professional?
Really interesting question. Um, I think if I look at it, two things stand out for me. One is that as MD, I realize that as an MD, I can make a material difference to our business as well as our colleagues in India. And that is both a privilege as well as, it's powerful. And that is something I really took to heart. And it's a really important part of who I am today as a professional.
Sure.
Because it was a responsibility, but it was also an opportunity. I think and the second thing I would say is that being part of an international publishing group, I got exposure to, diversity has been really, whether it's different cultures, it's different styles of working, it's different markets, it's, what we call international best practices. And that has really, it's widened my horizons, it's raised my bar, and I was able to bring all that, and that has done the same for my colleagues in India. And I think both, being more ambitious about what we can do, what we can achieve, and also who we are in this universe. So it's been an important learning and growth experience.
Great. So let me talk about your book, because I find it fascinating that you wrote the book Publishers on Publishing, which looks at the industry from the lens of various constituents, but it doesn't specifically cover anything on gender. Is there a specific reason why?
Okay, so I think that's probably got more to do with me. The short answer is I never thought of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably got, and that's probably got perhaps to do with more with me as a person and as the editor of the book than maybe with Indian publishing. So and I've said this before, I view myself not as a woman in publishing, but as a publishing professional.
Sure.
And I think that sort of creates the space to explore publishing, uh, you know, from various facets. And I think that's what impacted the gender. And it's not that it's not important. I think gender is relevant, is important. But I think in viewing Indian publishing and in viewing publishing professionals, it's much wider, it's much bigger, it's much more complex. Has much more value to look at it from all these other various perspectives.
So, considering today is International Women's Day, and considering the theme of this year is break the bias, would you consider this specific attribute? And I find it fascinating, and I personally believe in it myself as well. And I always tell women around me to kind of look at it in that fashion as well. Something that we have followed in all the companies that I have ever worked with or owned. Break the bias firstly should mean break the bias of thinking of yourself differently. Break the bias first by coming out and being equal to everyone, and just being a professional versus a girl or a boy or in any other fashion. But first and foremost, you are equal. First and foremost, you are a professional when you are in the professional background. How important do you consider that in your entire journey as a professional?
I think you made various very good points, which are very important. And if there's one thing I would say, in my journey, I would say that I've never let who I am define who I can be, or restrict who I can be. And I think that if I had to, share this with other professionals, and it could be, it's not just gender isn't the only bias we experience in our society. There's so many other kinds of diversity that we have, and counter to that, the biases that exist. But if we allow that to define us, then we get shackled by that. But if we don't do that, and in a way, I think if you ignore it, I mean, for me, gender has never been an issue in my life, and I think that I'm privileged and lucky to have had an upbringing which facilitated that. My education, my being economically independent was as if not more important than that of my brother. And so the gender never was a factor. And I think it was only when, you're talking to me on Women's Day and you're looking perhaps at me through the lens of gender, and then, the gender becomes part of the conversation. But otherwise in my life, it hasn't been. And I understand and I recognize that that's a privilege. But I urge people, whichever gender, whichever hue, to actually not uh, be restricted by the lens other people see you in. So in a sense, their ignorance or their can be your bliss. If you ignore it, then you are looking at other factors, other things that you can work on and, improve and develop, and other reasons for, perhaps having, gaps or failures or, less success sometimes. And you say, okay, what can I do which can make this better? How can I improve? What was rather than, I am, Indian, so it's because of that I'm not being looked at, or I'm a woman, or, I belong to a certain, part of the country, and so so it immediately frees you to explore yourself much more.
Sure. So while you were working on your book, you got to work with numerous people across the world and do, I'm sure, do a lot of close interactions. How was your experience working through such kind of a diverse background?
That's an interesting question. I have more than 60 contributors in the book, and people have been interviewed, written articles, and I would say it was great fun, a lot of learning, and people were so generous with their time, with their experience, and even they even stuck to deadlines. Most of them. Some there were some slippages, as they always are. So some people backed out, but for one person that backed out, there were others who did that extra piece at short notice, or at and that was very. It tells you something about publishing as a profession, and it reminded me of why I love being in this profession.
Sure.
And it also, and it's also in a way a lesson, because if you're doing something worthwhile for the profession and working with peers and having an inclusive approach, then people are ready to contribute, to go that extra mile. Everybody's busy, everybody's, wearing multiple hats, but people actually made the time, and we did that book in, in pretty record time. And that was because, people did that. They were generous with their time, and they believed it was valuable to showcase Indian publishing, and for that reason they contributed. And that makes you both very proud of Indian publishing and also very hopeful.
Sure.
That we have a future which is bright, because we have. And again, your point about globally getting that support, and linking to my point that I made earlier, I think there is a lot of goodwill. My book has been very well received all over the world. And it's because there is so much, interest in and value for what Indian publishing is doing.
Sure. I've personally always believed that this collaboration in the industry, with members of the community coming together and participating in common goals, is what is a must-have to create any industry, or is to actually do bigger things. Great. So, from a writer's perspective, what new avenues for author do you think need to be created for their better exposure, specifically from an Indian perspective?
Thank you. Again, I would, I would answer from my frame of knowledge, which is for academic writing and for researchers. And one of the things we experience is that we need to work with researchers to support capacity building. So often the writing will be of good quality, but it may get submitted to a journal which is not appropriate for it. So how can we guide and work together to ensure that researchers have that information and knowledge that they can submit the right, or it's framed in a way which does not follow the guidelines of, or the data protocol which is to be followed is not, So, and I've said this before as well, I think researchers need to invest as much in the process of dissemination as as they do in actually doing research, and writing the piece. And that is something where we can partner, support, and work with them. And we really take that to heart. And so capacity building and working with like-minded partners, like you mentioned Conversation Africa, but there are many others whom we work with to build research capacity, to train researchers, to help them be part of this global ecosystem. Because our researchers can and want to publish anywhere in the best across the world. So we should give them the tools and techniques and, to be able to do that. And that is something, sometimes there is a gap, in the conventional education and research ecosystem where that is not being addressed. So increasingly that is changing really with the focus on getting more research output, which is very much part of the current ecosystem. That is changing. But still, that is something we can do. So I always urge researchers to invest as much time in what dissemination and understanding how best they could outreach their research, and as in writing their research papers. And you will understand in all this, having mentors, reviewers, peers who can support and critique your work is really very important. And I think we should, as individuals, as authors, as writers, as researchers, hold ourselves up to those standards. We should be the gatekeepers of our own work.
Sure.
And if we do that, then we can overcome, the quality barriers and the other things that we researchers typically face from this part of the world.
Sure. Fantastic. Now, today's theme as International Women's Day is Break the Bias. So in this context, what would be your advice to women stepping into the professional world?
Well, as I said earlier, I think don't allow who you are to restrict who you can, So don't be bound by the kind of definition that you're put in as because of your birth or your gender or your geography. If you free yourself from that, and if after all you've been selected for a job because of your qualifications, because of your education, and I think treat that. So your difference should be your strength. Harness it to better yourself, to grow, to learn, to be open, rather than it becoming a restricting factor. At least you should not be putting a barrier for yourselves. The world may do that, and then you have to deal with that and learn to navigate that. But you should not restrict yourself from being who you can be.
Perfect. That's a lovely thought. So in your career, you have smashed several glass ceilings, and a lot of young women could actually learn from your experiences. So if specifically since you have written multiple books in the past, have been doing columns and doing other writings in the past, are you planning to share your life journey or your journey as a professional in the form of a book at some point?
Thank you. That's I'm an avid reader of the books written by successful men and women. I approach them with great curiosity. If I'm traveling, that's the second section in an airport bookshop I go to, and I pick up those books for my journey. And I'm very curious. I want to see. I'm always looking for that secret sauce of their success. I want to know what was the triggers and the factors. And the other thing I, of course, look for is, similarities with my own experiences and journeys. And I always come away, honestly, with feeling there's something missing, something they're not telling you. And so that's what got me thinking. I want to use my experiences to talk about those missing things, all those things which are there, but which people don't talk about, but which are so important because they determine your ability to navigate all the obstacles and to grow and learn. So that's what I'm trying to do. It's a work in progress, but it's a very enjoyable experience, and it also gets me an opportunity to read a lot of the stories of successful men and women. So let's see how that goes.
Fantastic. I'm sure our audience would certainly be looking forward to reading that. It's been a wonderful interaction. Any last thoughts, any parting thoughts that you would want to leave our audience with?
I think I would repeat again what I said. Uh, since we're talking in a professional context, treat yourself as the professional that you are. Harness your differences if there or your otherness. See it as a strength, as a positive, as something you can use, rather than as something that pulls you down. And it can be hard. It's not easy. And you mentioned that you've smashed ceilings, and I don't quite see it that way. I think there's some cracks, and one slips through, and one makes one's path. But mm, I think so. But it doesn't get easier. I mean, I can be honest about that. Wherever at the level you are, there will always be barriers. There will always be biases. But if you believe in yourself and learn to sort of harness your otherness as a strength, as something that you bring to the table, rather than as something you have to sort of uh, suppress or downplay. I think it is very valuable. And in today's workplace, where diversity, where inclusivity, where openness is of much greater value than when I started my journey many years ago, I think it will be, that secret sauce for success.
Great. That's a wonderful thought. So, don't be bound by where you come from to look at where you can go. Have your individual presence, harness your otherness, like you said. That's a wonderful thought. And I'm sure our audience is specifically considering, today is International Women's Day. I'm sure they will take a lot of heart. They will take a lot of inspiration from that. So thank you so much for that, Miss Nitasha. It's been a wonderful interaction with you. I'm sure we would want to come back to you, and have more of such interactions as Frontlist Media as well. Thank you so much for coming on today. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful year ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.